What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel. First off, I know I am wearing Bobcat stuff. I have family from Athens. It's okay. You see the colors behind me for those of you that are confused. I have family in Athens, and the Bobcats having a pretty good season so far. Not making the MAC championship game, but hey, gotta rep Ohio University, right? Welcome to my channel. If this is the first video you're seeing of mine, if you've been on the channel a long time before I dive on into what this video is going to talk about, I'll just get this out of the way right now. I just want to thank you guys for the support the channel has seen as of late. It has been crazy to me how much the channel grew over the summer and how much it's continued to grow during the college football season. Just thank you guys so much. So if you want to continue to show your support for the channel, really anything you do to help interact with the channel helps to support it. So whether that's hitting the subscribe button and ringing the bell, or just simply by watching the video, which are the two biggest ways to help support me, or whether or not that's simply just liking the video, whether that's leaving a comment, whether that's sharing it with your friends, your family, whoever it may be, I genuinely appreciate everything. Literally everything and anything that you guys do to help support and grow this channel. So before we dive on in to today's video, quick water break. Not sponsored by Gatorade, but just make sure you all stay hydrated out there. Okay, let's dive on into the thing that you saw in the title. We're going to be talking more about the college football playoff. So it's Fun Video Friday. I've sat here, I've talked about Michigan, I've talked about James Madison, and I've talked about the playoff before November. So that's what we're going to do again today. We are going to talk about the college football playoff. Again, I alluded to that video that I recorded back in the first week of November to kick off this month of college football, and looking at all the teams that are still alive that have a realistic chance at making the college football playoff, looking at their remaining schedule and everything like that. Well, we're going to kind of do the same thing here, except we're going to get more just, I don't know the word for it. We're basically going to go through a little bit, at least, kind of preview some scenarios for the college football playoff and what each team's chances are of making the college football playoff if certain things happen. We're also going to dive on into some chaos teams, a team like South Carolina last year that can cause a lot of drama in the college football playoff race. So, by the way, all the numbers that you will be seeing in this video are from the Allstate Playoff Predictor. So that is where I am getting all of my numbers for those of you that may be asking that in the comment section below after the video. But I hear yourself saying, Nate, I don't see anything. I mean, there's nothing really around you that would suggest you have. That is where you are mistaken. Those of you that have been on my channel before know about this thing, the grand old whiteboard. I have set up the whiteboard again today for this video. So I'll give you a nice, good look at it here. Pause for a thumbnail. Alrighty. Okay, let's dive on. Oh, I erased some of the marker. Okay, well, while I'm talking, I'm going to fix that. So this is a board to where we are going to look at the 9 remaining teams that, at least in my humble opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion as well, are still alive for a spot in the college football playoff. So let me go ahead and just fix lettering here. This is going to look so messy, but it's okay. It's okay. It's fine. All right. So here you go. Let's start on this side. So we're going to start talking about the 5 remaining undefeated Power 5 teams and how they can get into the college football playoff. So obviously it is really easy to say that, look, if any of these teams here win out, they're getting in the college football playoff. And you can see that through the percentages that are listed on the whiteboard. So they are listed in order of the way that they are ranked by the college football playoff committee. They're not in terms of like percentage chance or anything like that, although there is a trend that goes along with that, right? But they purely are ranked based, I guess purely are listed by the way the college football playoff committee does rank them. So you have the Georgia Bulldogs, Ohio State Buckeyes, and Michigan Wolverines. Each of them have a greater than 99% chance if they win out. And by the way, I am using win out in terms of I also am thinking that they win their conference championship game. So that's when they win their 2 remaining regular season games, and then they go win their conference title. You see pretty much that if any one of these teams wins out, I mean, obviously they're going to be undefeated and they're in the college football playoff. The easiest solution to the playoff right now is that Georgia wins out, Florida State wins out, Washington wins out, and then either the winner of Ohio State, Michigan on November 25th, whatever team that may be, goes and wins the Big Ten championship game and gets into the college football playoff. And even if they don't win the Big Ten championship game, probably still getting into the college football playoff no matter what. I did run those numbers, and they were pretty favorable, whether or not Ohio State, Michigan, whoever ended up winning that game, finishing out the season, or I should say the regular season, unbeaten. If they even were to lose the conference championship game, which, given the state of the Big Ten West, is pretty unlikely, they'd still have a pretty favorable shot to get into the playoff, although I don't remember those numbers, and they are not on the board. So Georgia, they have okay, so now let's go ahead and dive on into some scenarios. Words are hard for me. I apologize. Obviously, it's really clear, really easy to see. If these 5 teams win out, they're going to get in the college football playoff, and there really is no way to that like all 5 of these teams win out. Obviously, because these 2 teams, Ohio State and Michigan, that's going to settle itself out. That is going to work itself out. They have to play each other on November 25th. But let's go ahead and dive on in to some scenarios on what happens. What happens if these teams drop one game? Well, I did run the numbers on a couple different of scenarios, and I did run the numbers on, again, some of the more likely scenarios as well. So, if Georgia finishes the season with 1 loss, and their only 1 loss, the only 1 loss is to the Tennessee Volunteers. That is the game upcoming this weekend. If they lose that game to Tennessee, yet still win the SEC championship game, that's important to know. The scenario does have Georgia winning the SEC championship game. They are getting into the college football playoff. Now, obviously, for obvious reasons, which is why it's not on the board, if Georgia loses to Tennessee and then, say, loses to the Alabama Crimson Tide in the SEC championship game, obviously that's 2 losses, probably not getting into the college football playoff. And speaking of the Alabama Crimson Tide, if Georgia were to go out, finish the regular season unbeaten, which means they beat Tennessee, they beat Georgia Tech, but yet the Alabama Crimson Tide, they trip them up in the SEC championship game, you're down to now a 63% chance. So you go from a 98% chance if you still lose that game to Tennessee but win the SEC, in all likelihood you're in, to a 63% chance. So still a really good shot, even if your 1 lone loss is in the SEC championship game. Now, again, it probably does depend on what else happens. Because if 3 of these 4 teams win out, again, 1 of Ohio State or Michigan, it's probably going to be pretty hard to put Georgia in, considering the rest of the teams in the field will be unbeaten, and then you lose the tiebreaker to Alabama because of the SEC championship game. So that's definitely something to watch out for. But, I mean, all the numbers say more often than not, Georgia's going to get into the college football playoff as they have for the previous 2 seasons. Well, what about Ohio State and Michigan? I'm going to come back to that. So let's skip to Florida State and Washington, because Ohio State, Michigan is where things start to get a little bit more convoluted, kind of just as they did last season. So for the Florida State Seminoles, obviously you went out. You have a 99% chance to get into the playoff. You're probably going to get in, as the committee has kept this team in the top 4, even though Washington has really started to build their resume. Okay, so what happens if Florida State ends up dropping a game? And it's that game to Florida in the Swamp on the final week of the regular season. But then they turn around and go win the ACC championship game. Well, that's a 42% chance to get into the playoffs. So Florida State has the win over the LSU Tigers. They also have a win over the Duke Blue Devils. And then presumably you'd have a win over, say, Louisville or North Carolina in the ACC championship game. But your lone loss is to Florida on the road. They're going to be a team that probably does not finish the season ranked in all likelihood. However, maybe barring some chaos, the committee can get them in to their top 25. But just simply taking a look at, if you were to drop that game to Florida, it would definitely do a lot of harm for your chances to get into the college football playoff. And even worse is if you win out. So you beat North Alabama, which is going to happen, and then you lose to Florida. You beat North Alabama, and then you beat Florida in the Swamp. Maybe it's a close game. Maybe it's a blowout. Anyway, you slice it. But then you go turn around and lose in the ACC championship game with the strength of these other conferences. That drops your percentage down to 8%. So even though you do finish the regular season unbeaten, you do not win your conference title, and that drops you to 8%. It's even worse for the Washington Huskies. So 98% chance to get in if they win out. If your one and only loss is to the Oregon State Beavers this week, but then you turn around, you beat Washington State, then you turn around and you win the Pac-12 championship, you got a 46% chance to get in, again, depending on what else happens around you. Definitely going to be a little bit interesting to watch. But if Washington gets in unscathed, and they get into Las Vegas 12-0 with, everything on the line to get into the college football playoff, but you lose that game, it drops you all the way down to 4%. Now, that may be really hard to believe for some people, especially considering the strength of the Pac-12 this year, but there's a team that's in frame right now in the Oregon Ducks that they will likely play, and the reason that is at 4% is because in all likelihood, if it is Oregon that gets into the Pac-12 championship game and ends up beating Washington, they are going to get in over the Washington Huskies, even though the season series is split. Oregon won the game that mattered more on the neutral site in the Pac-12 championship game. Oregon would get the college football playoff spot if everything else has worked out around it to be able to do so. And a lot of people think that Oregon is going to win the Pac-12 anyway. So this scenario, not that unlikely. Now, all this stuff with Florida State, fairly unlikely. Could an upset with Florida happen? Yes, absolutely. That is why it is on the board. And could an upset in the ACC championship happen? Absolutely, especially with a team that you're going to see over here. I'm pointing to them at a frame right now. But so that's kind of what happens with these three teams. Now, I mentioned I would get back to Ohio State and Michigan because it definitely is. Whoops, sorry, previewing the board a little bit too early. My arm's just getting tired. It definitely is a little bit more of a complicated and interesting conversation to have. So when you take a look at Ohio State and Michigan, these are two teams that got into the college football playoff last year. In all likelihood, Ohio State's going to beat Minnesota this week, and Michigan is going to beat Maryland this week. But we're going to touch more on that in a second. Don't want to spoil too much. However, in all likelihood, both of these teams enter 11-0. These two teams in Ohio State and Michigan, if your one loss is to the other, and again, in all likelihood, whoever wins the Ohio State and Michigan game, yes, is guaranteed a spot in the Big Ten championship game, but then will go beat anyone that ends up coming out of the Big Ten West, just because of the state of that division right now, being very, very competitive. Right now, Iowa is that front runner, and I think every college football fan knows Iowa does not have enough offense to keep up with the defenses of Ohio State and Michigan and with what both these two teams provide offensively either. But let's take a look at the numbers at if the one loss is to each other, what's your percentage to still get into the college football playoff? Because obviously if you lose that game on November 25th, you're not going to Indianapolis, you're not making the Big Ten championship game. So if it were to be Ohio State that ends up losing that game, so your one lone loss is to Michigan, 45% chance still to get into the college football playoff even after championship weekend, which is a pretty substantial number. Now, again, there would need to be some chaos that happened. You maybe would need one of these two things to happen, if not both of them. You may need Texas to lose as well in the Big 12 and anything like that. But in all likelihood, if the Big 10 yet again is going to want to get two teams into the college football playoff, the Big Ten is better off having Michigan win the game than Ohio State because of this number right here. 23% chance. If Michigan's one loss is to the Ohio State Buckeyes, that's all they have, even after championship weekend, to get into the college football playoff. Now, part of those numbers, as I set the whiteboard down for a second here to kind of rest my arms, you can still see them down here, though. Part of those numbers is because of the resumes that both of those teams have built. So Ohio State, obviously, in a lot of people's opinions, including my own, has a much better resume than what the Michigan Wolverines have. The Michigan Wolverines non-conference schedule is not all that great, and I know that Bowling Green has been playing pretty solid football, and UNLV has been a pretty surprise team in the Mountain West Conference. It just doesn't compare to what the Ohio State Buckeyes have had to go through in their non-conference, specifically talking about the game against Notre Dame, who is a top 25 team in the committee's eyes right now and likely will stay that way through the end of the season. They have Wake Forest and Stanford, two very winnable games for that Notre Dame Fighting Irish team. Michigan's real first pride and true resume-building win was last week against Penn State. Ohio State went on the road in a tough place to play and beat Wisconsin. They also already have a win against Maryland. Now Michigan can get that this week as well. And obviously, either of those two teams' resumes will be complete if they're able to beat one another. So whether or not it's Ohio State that beats Michigan or Michigan that beats Ohio State, the resumes are going to be really, really good because you're going to be a top 3 team in pretty much any scenario that happens. So that is why Ohio State and Michigan can complicate things again this year. If there is a little bit of upsets and some chaos that happens, who knows? Both of them could definitely end up breaking in to the college football playoff. But if that scenario were to happen, it is in a lot of people's best interest, if they want to see both Ohio State and Michigan in the playoff and a possible shot to meet in the national championship game, that Michigan wins the game on November 25th, which is a very hard thing for me to say, especially considering all the things that are around me, but you get my point. So let's go ahead and move on to this side of the board, which is the one-loss teams. Now, the one-loss teams are pretty simple because obviously if they take a second loss, they're not getting into the college football playoff, especially some of the teams down here. So let's go ahead and take a look at these numbers. Again, they are sorted by the way the college football playoff committee has them ranked. So obviously the Oregon Ducks, their one and only loss is to a team on the other side of this board in the Washington Huskies. So if the Oregon Ducks were to win out, obviously win the Pac-12 championship game, they're given a 91% chance to get in. However, again, that's just what the Allstate Playoff Predictor says. However, I have a hard time believing that Oregon, here, can you see that? There you go, 91%. Sorry, lighting kind of with the numbers there. But I would have a very hard time believing that Oregon gets left out of the college football playoff if they avenge their loss to Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. Now, obviously, it would be a very Oregon thing to do, to go on the road and lose at Arizona State this weekend. Oregon historically has had trouble with some of these games in November where they have dropped and then fallen out of the college football playoff conversation. Do I believe that's going to happen? Not by a long shot. I think Oregon is a much better team than we have seen in years prior. I believe that Oregon is a team that you really need to watch out for to get into the college football playoff. That's a national championship contender in Eugene with Bo Nix at quarterback. Oregon, if you want a one-loss team as it currently stands to make the college football playoff, Oregon is your best bet to do so because they are a team that will face someone on this side of the board, at least according to the Allstate Playoff Predictor. Now, we are going to skip over Texas because Alabama is your second best shot to do so. If they win out, they win the SEC. I find it hard to believe that Alabama is going to be left out, right, at 66%. However, again, that's where things start to get a little bit interesting considering Alabama lost to Texas. Now it's really going to help Alabama's case if Texas goes and wins the Big 12, of which if they do so and they win out, they're sitting at 12-1, Big 12 champs, 64%, according to the playoff predictor, to get into the college football playoff. And these two numbers are only the way they are simply because of everything that can happen on this side of the board. Because, again, if that is Georgia's lone loss, you probably get in... Sorry about that. If that's Georgia's one loss in the SEC championship game to the Alabama Crimson Tide, you probably get in anyway, according to the 63% that is now out of frame. Ohio State and Michigan, well, one of those two teams is going to win that game on November 25th, and more likely than not, go win the Big Ten championship game. One of these two teams, in all guaranteed likelihood, is getting into the college football playoff. Florida State, as long as they win out, take care of business, they're going to be in. And then Washington, if they win out, or Oregon, if they win out, will be representing the Pac-12 in the college football playoff for the first time since Washington did it in 2016. So that is why these two numbers are so low. Now, Texas does have the win over the Alabama Crimson Tide, which started to not look great at the beginning of the year, but has only started to look better and better and better, right? Just when you go ahead and you take a look at this side of the board, Oregon, Texas, and Alabama, Oregon does not need a lot of chaos to happen at all. All Oregon has to do is they need to take care of business and they need to win out. That is all that Oregon needs to do. You're going to get a resume-boosting win if you beat Oregon State in the final game of the regular season. More about the Beavers later. And you're going to get a huge chance to avenge your loss, more than likely to the Washington Huskies in the Pac-12 championship game if both teams are able to get there. Again, nothing is set in stone in the Pac-12 up to this point, which is how a lot of people figured the conference was going to play out this year. Anyway, Texas and Alabama are going to need something on this side of the board to fall, right? You're going to need a team on this side of the board to fall, maybe multiple of them, but still not a bad chance to get into the college football playoff, especially if it is the Alabama Crimson Tide. Have a very hard time believing that they're going to leave the SEC champ out, as that has never happened in the world of in the world of the 4-team college football playoff. But the one team that makes this conversation really interesting is the 9th team right here. So everyone is talking about these top 8, and everyone's talking about teams 1 through 8 as the teams that you need to pay attention to, because those are the teams that are going to end up in the college football playoff, at least in some combination. Louisville is still sitting here alive. Now, yes, they have a loss to a very, very bad Pitt team. And if that game would have been won by Louisville, this conversation definitely would be a whole lot more interesting, because then you would have a 6th team on this side of the board competing with the Florida State Seminoles. But right now, Louisville does not even have a spot clinched in the ACC championship game. Now, obviously, Florida State does. They are done with ACC play, and they are in Charlotte for the ACC championship game. But Louisville, not yet. Not yet, they aren't, and they got a really tricky game on the road here against the Miami Hurricanes, and that is definitely something to watch out for, right? You got to watch out. You got to be careful for that road game, but if you win out, and that means you win the ACC, you beat Florida State, you're able to win the remainder of your games. They don't have 2 easy ones, right? I just erased one marker. Anyway, you got to play Kentucky, and you have to play Miami. I just said that. Don't know why it escaped my mind for a second there. So still 2 tough games coming up here for Louisville. If you can survive those, you can win the ACC. Playoff Predictor is only giving you a 25% chance to get in, likely because the resume is not necessarily comparable to any of these teams up here. Again, even the Florida State Seminoles, who hail from the same conference, have a really big non-conference win against the SEC's LSU Tigers. However, so in order for Louisville to get into the college football playoff, obviously they're going to have to beat Florida State. And as we see on this side of the board, if Florida State loses that ACC championship game, that could be detrimental to their playoff hopes, because obviously Louisville would have the tiebreaker over that if it were Louisville that were to beat Florida State in the ACC title game. But they're going to need a lot to happen. You're going to need Alabama to go down, probably going to need someone other than Texas to win the Big 12 in all likelihood. Again, one of Oregon, Washington will probably get in, but you do need these 2 teams ahead of you to fall. So there are some more pieces that need to fall into place, more so than anybody else on the board by far, for Louisville to get into the college football playoff. But just like TCU last year, not out of the realm of possibility, although you definitely could see that TCU has a better, or I should say had a better resume last year than what Louisville has so far this season. But yeah, so that's what the Allstate Playoff Predictor says. I want to dive in to this section right here, dubbing chaos teams. And these are teams that, look, so again, they are what they say they are, right? They're teams that cause chaos. So take, for instance, last year, South Carolina. South Carolina had Tennessee and Clemson, final 2 games of the regular season, and really put a damper on both of those teams' hopes to get into the college football playoff, and really started to simplify a lot of things in the college football playoff race. Let's see. Can we think of a team that has 2 college football playoff contenders in the last 2 games of the regular season that maybe we might not see coming? I can. And it hails from this side of the board. So we're going to move this magnet, and we're going to move it right here. Your first chaos team is the Oregon State Beavers. Well, Nate, why the Oregon State Beavers? I just explained to you why the Oregon State Beavers. They're the only team that I'm going to be putting on this board that has 2 college football playoff contenders left on their schedule, being Washington this week, at home in Corvallis. It's already a game I think Oregon State is going to win, and then the game next week against the Oregon Ducks in what used to be called the Civil War. Oregon State is a chaos team this season. Oregon State has the potential to be this year's South Carolina. Again, the way South Carolina was able to beat Tennessee, the way they were able to beat Clemson, they could beat both Washington and Oregon, which effectively, if they beat Oregon, would knock them out of the college football playoff race. Again, wouldn't necessarily eliminate Washington, as you saw by this percentage number here, which was, hey, if Washington's only losses to Oregon State, but they win the Pac-12, what happens? Well, in all likelihood, the percentages right now are favoring Oregon to win the Pac-12 championship. And not even that, if Oregon State beats both of those teams, there is a scenario where Oregon State gets into the Pac-12 championship game, which would cause even more chaos. So that is why the Oregon State Beavers are a chaos team. That is why Oregon State is a team to where if you are just looking at someone to, okay, who can really clean up the college football playoff picture in one game, in two games, anything like that, it's Oregon State. And this team is a whole lot better than last year's version of South Carolina was. Arguably, though, they are playing two teams right there that may be a little bit better than what Tennessee and Clemson were last season. But the Oregon State Beavers, chaos team number one. Chaos team number two. Hailing from the Big Ten Conference, the Maryland Terrapins. Why Maryland? Well, let's take a gander back over to this side of the board. I've already previewed Michigan's remaining schedule. They have the game on the road against, well, the team I just put up on the board, the Maryland Terrapins, and they also have, and then again, obviously, Michigan has the game against Ohio State. But when you look at that game against the team, again, that I just put up on the board, the Maryland Terrapins, what happens if Maryland wins that game? Because while it definitely is not likely, it is still within the realm of possibility that, hey, maybe Michigan is looking ahead to the Ohio State Buckeyes and all the things that people say about rivalries year in and year out. Oh, maybe they're looking ahead, the potential tricky road game, trap game. Maryland gave fits to Ohio State last year in the exact same scenario that Michigan is in. Now, did Ohio State lose the game? No, they ended up losing to Michigan a week later. Could the same pattern emerge here, if not play out better for Maryland? Absolutely. Maryland's got a lot of very good players. They have the talent to be able to do what they need to do to be able to upset the Michigan Wolverines. Now, do I personally think it is going to happen? No, but let's pretend that it does. What happens if it does? Well, it makes the conversation a whole lot more interesting because then if Michigan goes and beats the Ohio State Buckeyes, that could definitely put the conversation a lot more interesting because now with the resumes, Texas beating, okay, obviously Michigan beating Ohio State is going to be a really good win, but then you're in the conversation of Texas, and then you're in the conversation of Oregon, and then what happens if Florida State wins out, Georgia wins out, you're sitting there as a one-loss team with a not great non-conference schedule. The conversation could be very interesting if things play out in a certain way, if Maryland's able to beat Michigan to where Michigan is sitting at the end, kind of holding their breath at whether or not they get into the college football playoff. So that's why Maryland is a chaos team. Another chaos team here for the very reason of this team right here, very, very simple on why they're on the board. It's the Miami Hurricanes. Really, the only reason they are on the board is because, hey, they clean up the playoff conversation if they are able to beat the Louisville Cardinals. Pretty much the only reason why they are here, but Miami can definitely cause some havoc down the stretch, so watch out for the Miami Hurricanes. I am going to take another magnet over here. We're going to go to the state of Florida again, and we're going to select the Florida Gators. Yes, because of the reasons that I talked about over here. If Florida State ends up losing that game to Florida, again, you really make the conversation a whole lot more interesting because then you get to the comparisons of, okay, so then what happens with Texas and Bama and Oregon? You start comparing Florida State to those one-loss conference champions if Florida State were to drop this game to Florida and then get in and win the ACC championship game. So Florida is definitely a team that can cause some chaos as well. Now, these last two teams here are definitely very, very interesting to talk about as chaos teams. The first one I'm going to talk about, this team right here, the Arizona Wildcats. Arizona has been a very big surprise so far this season, and I talked about it in my preview prediction video when I previewed their game against the Utah Utes this week. Arizona's not out of the Pac-12 championship race. What happens if Arizona gets in? So same kind of thing that can happen with the Oregon State Beavers. What happens if Oregon State causes chaos by beating both of them and then maybe going and winning the Pac-12 conference? Arizona State's going to need some things to fall their way. They do. And Oregon State may definitely need to help with that. These two chaos teams can work in conjunction. But Arizona has the tiebreaker win over Oregon State. So if they get to 7-2 in conference, they win their final two games, and they're able to get into the Pac-12 championship game, there's another chaos team right there. So a lot of people may be looking at Arizona like, oh, this is just such a feel-good story. They are not out of the Pac-12 championship race if they get in it. No, they don't play Washington. No, they don't play Oregon down the stretch. But there is a chance for them to get into the Pac-12 championship game. Maybe you're sitting there against a one-loss Washington, a one-loss Oregon, things like that. That's a team to watch out for, especially if they can sneak into Las Vegas in the Pac-12 championship. Likely, not necessarily, but definitely something that can happen. Last chaos team, also hailing from the Big Ten, is the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, why the Iowa Hawkeyes? Well, I've talked about the state of the Big Ten West and how it really is Iowa and then everybody else and then maybe a bar and then Purdue, right? But no, it is Iowa and then the field in the Big Ten West. If Iowa beats Illinois this weekend, they get into the Big Ten championship game. Now, they're going to have to face one of these two teams. And the reason why there isn't a second number on the board is because pretty confidently can tell you that I think Ohio State or Michigan are winning the Big Ten championship game over the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, is that a set in stone thing? No, this is college football we're talking about. Upsets happen all the time. Iowa can make the conversation really interesting as well, depending on what else happens if they beat Ohio State or Michigan in the Big Ten championship game. And now you're looking at Iowa, maybe a 2-loss Big Ten champ with a win over Ohio State or Michigan. But you're probably closer looking at Ohio State and Michigan saying, oh, man, they got all the way there to lose to Iowa. What are we going to do with them, right? The conversation becomes interesting. Again, there are 2 weeks left, plus championship week, so 3 weeks left. Still a lot that can happen, but I wanted to sit down and talk about all this. So here's the board for one final time. Pause for thumbnail. Alrighty. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I know it was quite a long video, so I really do appreciate you guys sticking around here and listening to me ramble on about college football. Hey, it's what I do best. You want to continue to show your support, like, comment, share, do anything you need to do to help support the channel. I'm going to sign off. We'll give you one final look here at the whiteboard. Sorry for the silence. I just want you guys to be able to look at the whiteboard. And I will see you guys again in the next video. Enjoy your college football Saturday. Maybe we might see some chaos this week. A lot of big games. Again, enjoy your college football Saturday. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. See you guys in the next video. Goodbye.